My name is Evan Marshall. I'm 41 years old. I'm a veterinarian, and I own my own clinic in Asheville, North Carolina. I treat dogs and cats, sometimes horses from nearby farms. I've worked with animals for 18 years, and in those 18 years, I've learned one thing. Animals don't lie. They can hide something from you because they're in pain, but they don't lie. That's probably the main reason I chose this profession. I have a hard time with lies. If you've ever looked into the eyes of the person you love most in the world and known with certainty that they just lied to you about something small, and then realized that the small thing was the tip of an iceberg, like and subscribe. This story is worth watching to the end, because how I found out and what I did with it isn't like any story I've heard. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I didn't smash a plate against the wall. I did something completely different, and I'll tell you everything in order. I'll tell this story the way I'd tell it to one of my colleagues after a long shift when we're sitting in the back room drinking cold coffee. No ornaments, no exaggeration. I won't make myself the hero. I'm not the hero. I won't make my wife into a monster. She's not a monster. I'll just describe what happened and what I was thinking at each of the key moments. If you catch even one thought from this story that helps you make the right decision in your own life, that will be more than I can promise. I'm a veterinarian. I'm not a psychologist, not a writer, not a philosopher. I'm just a man who once in his life ran into something he wasn't ready for and did the best he could in circumstances he didn't want to be in. My wife's name is Haley. She's 38. We've been together 12 years, married for 9. We have 2 children, Maya, who's 7, and Owen, who's 4. Haley works as a real estate agent at a local company that specializes in country homes. She's good at her job. She has a soft voice that puts buyers at ease, and she knows how to listen. I fell in love with her precisely for that ability to listen. When we first started dating, she asked me questions about my patients, as if she wanted to know every detail. Most people aren't interested in veterinary details. Haley was. That was one of the things by which I knew this is her. We met at a mutual friend's wedding in August 12 years ago. I came alone. She came alone. We ended up at the same table. One of the guests had brought their dog, a small corgi named Biscuit, and at some point Biscuit crawled under our table and lay down between my shoes. Haley noticed before I did. She leaned down, petted him, and said, "I envy this dog. He found the best spot in the room." That was the first sentence she said to me. I turned to her and saw her smile for the first time. We had a normal path. 3 years of dating, 2 years of living together, then the wedding, then the first child, then the house in the country, then the second child. Nothing unusual. An ordinary American story. We weren't one of those perfect couples who put their life on social media. I don't remember us ever trying to impress anyone with our relationship. We just lived, quietly, without drama, without big problems. I thought everything was fine. Maybe that was my first mistake. I thought fine, instead of regularly checking whether it really was fine or whether it just seemed that way. Our house is on a hill outside town, on 4 acres of land. I bought it 2 years before I met Haley when I opened the clinic and wanted to live somewhere where my dogs would have room to run. We have 2 dogs, an old Labrador named Bruno, he's 11, and a husky mix we took in from a shelter 3 years ago named Yuka. Bruno is mine. Yuka we took in together. Bruno comes running to meet me every evening when I open the gate. Yuka waits at the door. From their behavior, I can usually tell how the day went in the house before I came home. I didn't know that this canine diplomacy would one day help me discover the most important thing in my life. I want to say one more thing about these 12 years before I get to the summer when everything fell apart. I think that in any long marriage there are moments when something drifts apart, but not all of them lead to infidelity. We had such moments too. After Owen was born, Haley had postpartum depression for about a year. We didn't talk about it openly, but I recognized her by her heavy mornings. I tried to be there, take the night feedings when I could. Those were hard months for both of us, but I thought we'd gotten through them together. Then there was a period when my clinic was expanding, 3 years ago, when I took on another veterinarian as a partner, and we opened a second location in a neighboring town. I was working 12-hour days then. Haley said a few times that she missed me. I promised that in 6 months it would get easier. It did get easier, but probably not easy enough for her. I'm not making excuses for her. No period of a husband's busyness justifies infidelity. But I understand, in hindsight, that in our marriage there were periods when our connection weakened, and neither of us did enough to restore it. That's maybe the only place in this story where I bear some responsibility. Not for her infidelity, for not noticing how our connection had grown thinner. I thought marriage was a machine that, once properly assembled, runs by itself. I was wrong. Marriage is a garden. If you don't tend it every week, it grows over. I had other priorities, and I stopped tending. Haley stopped too. Only she found another garden. I don't justify her choice. But I stopped considering her the sole guilty party. In long relationships, there's rarely just one guilty party. This doesn't change my decision to divorce. It just changes my internal story about how we got there. And that, I think, has helped me eventually forgive. Not now. Not yet. But in time. Because I no longer see myself as the victim and her as the criminal. We both made mistakes. Her mistake was louder and more clear-cut. Mine was quieter and spread out over time. But we both bear responsibility for the fact that our garden grew over. Haley started behaving strangely at the beginning of the summer. They were small things that meant nothing individually. She started spending more time on her phone. She put a password on her laptop, which she had never done before. We had never had passwords from each other in our family. We both considered it unnecessary. She started going to house showings more often in the evenings and on weekends, and sometimes she'd come back only at 11. When I asked how it went, she'd answer briefly, "Fine, usual, nothing special." Haley had never answered me so briefly about work before. Before, she'd tell me about every client, who was looking for what the complaints were, what funny stories had happened. Now she'd just pour herself a glass of wine and go take a shower. There was another sign that I noticed but didn't understand. Haley started using a new perfume. She had a habit of one scent. She'd worn it all 12 years, and I recognized her by it even in the dark. That scent was part of who she was to me. In mid-June, I noticed a different scent on her clothes, sharper, younger, louder. I thought then she was just trying something new. Now I understand that she wore her old perfume for me, and the new one for someone else. It was her own little boundary that separated real life from the other life. Smells can betray too. I didn't know that before that summer. There was a third moment. Maya said one morning at breakfast, "Mom, why don't you wear your blue bracelet anymore?" I didn't pay attention then, but it filed itself away in my head. Haley wore that thin blue bracelet. I gave it to her on our 5th wedding anniversary. Every day, 4 years in a row. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it. Haley said something to Maya about the clasp being broken and that she'd sent it for repair. I didn't pursue it. Now I think that bracelet was probably in her purse and came off every time she went to a showing. It got in the way of her being who she was when I wasn't around. Children notice things like that because their memory of parents works by different rules than our memory of spouses. Children remember details. Haley should have been more careful with Maya. That, by the way, is another reason why I ended up acting the way I did. If even a little daughter starts noticing changes in her mother, there's not much time. There was a 4th moment that I can now assemble into the bigger picture, though I missed it at the time. Haley changed the password on our shared Netflix account, without explanation. When I asked, she said the site had asked for an update for security reasons. I believed her then. Now I think she just didn't want me seeing the list of what she was watching. It's a small thing, and a strange small thing. Who cares what movies your spouse watches? But in her situation, apparently, even Netflix had become part of a separate life. Maybe she and Drew were watching something together on their phones. I don't know. I say this because when you live with a person who has acquired a parallel life, that life starts to penetrate every shared account, every shared space, in small, imperceptible ways. And if you're looking with the right focus, you'll see the signs. The problem is that most people, including me back then, don't want to see them. To see means to start acting. And acting is frightening. So it's easier not to see. Up to a certain point, it works. Then it stops working. I didn't notice right away. When you live with a person for 12 years, you get used to the background noise of their moods. If they're silent for a day, it's tiredness. If for 3 days, it's work. If for 2 weeks, you have to ask. I asked once, in mid-July, on our back porch, after we'd put the kids to bed. I asked gently, not as an accusation, but as concern. I said, "Haley, you've been kind of distant lately. Is everything okay?" She looked at me and smiled the smile that looks right, but doesn't reach the eyes. She said, "I'm just tired, Evan. Summer is the season. Give me until September." I nodded. I believed her. That was one of the stupidest things I did that year. I want to come back to that smile, because it became for me the symbol of that whole period. It was a smile that did its job on the outside. The lips went up, the cheeks lifted, the general shape of the face matched. All is well. But the eyes weren't doing their job. The eyes stayed cold, distant, occupied with something else. I've seen that smile on my clients 1,000,000 times. When an owner brings in a dog and says, "Doctor, she seems okay, but just in case." And I look at the dog, and I see that the dog isn't okay. But the owner doesn't want to see it, because seeing it means facing the diagnosis. The owner smiles like Haley, a smile that asks me not to dig deeper. I'd had that smile in front of my eyes 1,000 times. I could recognize it in anyone except my own wife. That's probably one of the most humiliating discoveries from that story, that my professional skills for reading nonverbal signals shut off when I looked at the person closest to me. I trusted Haley more than I trusted my experience. And that time, that trust betrayed me. Now I look at people a little differently. I haven't become paranoid. I don't suspect everyone. But I've learned to trust my first feeling when it tells me something's wrong, even when it's about someone close. Before, I dismissed that feeling as paranoia. Now I make a note and observe. That doesn't mean acting right away. It means not closing my eyes. Between trust without questions and constantly suspect, there's a mature middle. Trust and simultaneously notice. I hadn't mastered that middle then. I live in it now. A week after that conversation, Bruno hurt his paw. Old lab, arthritis, harder and harder for him to run. I bandaged him up and brought him home from the clinic early, around 3 in the afternoon. Haley was at a showing that day. She'd left right after lunch and was supposed to be back by 6. Her car was in the next town over, as she'd said in the morning. When I came into the house carrying Bruno, Yucca didn't meet me at the door. That was the first strangeness. Yucca is always at the door. I found her in the bedroom, lying on the floor on the other side of the bed, looking under the bed. I walked around, looked. Under the bed was a phone. Not Haley's phone. She always carried her usual phone with her. It was a second phone. Old, simple, no password. I didn't immediately understand what I was seeing. I stared at that phone for about 10 seconds, thinking whose it could be. Maybe one of our friends left it. Maybe Maya had been playing with an old phone and rolled it. Then I picked it up and pressed the button. The screen lit up. The wallpaper. A photo. In the photo was Haley in a dress I didn't recognize, with a glass of wine in a restaurant we'd never been to. The shot was clearly taken by someone sitting across from her. I put the phone back on the floor, exactly where it had been. I stood for a minute looking at Yucca. Yucca looked at me. I want to pause on this moment, because everything I've learned about dogs in 18 years came together in it. Yucca wasn't trying to show me anything. She didn't bark. She didn't nudge me toward the phone with her nose. She just lay on the floor and looked under the bed. That was her natural behavior. She's that kind of dog. She always has something she stares at for a long time. But that behavior was in the right place, at the right time. If I hadn't come home early, I would never have found that phone. Haley must have had some system, charged it at work, hid it in a specific spot, took it away before I got home. That day Bruno hurt his paw. I left earlier than usual, and she just didn't have time to put it away as she normally would. Maybe she shoved it under the bed in a hurry, thinking I'd come at 5. Yucca found it because she has a nose. I found it because I had yucca. Sometimes life is made up of coincidences that aren't random, but aren't planned either. They just happen when they're supposed to happen. I put Bruno on the floor next to Yucca. Yucca immediately licked his ear. Bruno weakly nuzzled her with his nose. My 2 witnesses, without words. I didn't say anything. I left the bedroom, carried Bruno to his bed in the living room, and sat down on the couch. I sat for 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I was thinking. At first I was thinking that I might be wrong. Maybe it's her work phone. Maybe it's some gift from a friend. Maybe the photo means nothing. But I knew. When you've spent 18 years reading the nonverbal signals of animals and people, you learn to distinguish real signals from noise. That phone was a real signal. I got up, went back into the bedroom, carefully picked up the phone, opened it. There was no password. I opened the messages. They were there. Not one. Dozens. They came from a number marked with the letter D. The messages were the type that husbands don't want to read about their wives. I won't retell them in detail. I'll only say that they ran for 4 months, that they described meetings in hotels in Asheville and Charlotte, that they contained photos I shouldn't have seen, and they showed that these meetings happened on days when Haley told me she was at a showing or in a meeting with a client. I went through all of them. It took me about 40 minutes. I sat on the bedroom floor next to Yucca and read. Yucca didn't move. She looked at me. I think she knew. Dogs often know such things before people do, because they sense smells and don't explain them to themselves. I want to describe what I learned in those 40 minutes because it's important for understanding what I did next. The man's name was Drew. He was one of her clients. She'd shown him a house 9 months ago and he'd bought it. He was 7 years younger than me, divorced, with a little daughter he saw every other weekend. They met about twice a week, sometimes at a hotel, sometimes at his place when he didn't have his daughter. From the messages I understood that Haley was telling him our marriage was long dead, that I worked too much and was emotionally unavailable, that she was thinking of leaving but couldn't because of the kids. That was the script most people in her situation tell their lovers. I wasn't angry at the specific words. I felt something deeper. I understood that the woman I'd lived with for 12 years had a parallel version of our marriage in her head, a version I'd never seen, and that she'd never discussed with me. That was more painful than the infidelity itself. She didn't come to me and say, "Evan, we need to talk. Something's wrong." She just rewrote our marriage as a story in which I'm the bad one, without presenting that story to me itself. I had no chance to agree or to argue. I'd just been rewritten in her head as a bad husband, and that rewriting became the justification for everything that came next. That was the most painful piece of reading. Not the dates themselves, but her internal narrative that allowed her to live with this. I closed the phone and sat on the floor for a long time. When I finally got up, I thought about one thing. Why I didn't want to destroy anything right now. I could have had that desire. I could have taken that phone and gone downstairs to the living room with it, and waited for her to come home, and put it on the table in front of her, and demanded explanations. That would have been one scenario. It has its pluses: quick resolution, clean truth. I don't carry 2 weeks of lies inside me. It has a big minus too. Haley, in the moment of shock, could have done things that would cost me later. She could have taken the kids to her mother's that very evening. She could have moved money. She could have been the first to go to a lawyer with a story in which I threatened her or behaved aggressively. I, in a moment of confrontation, could also have done things that would cost me later. I could have lost control of my voice, and the children would have heard yelling. I could have said something that would later be quoted in court against me. In that second on the bedroom floor, I understood I didn't want to risk that way. I have a choice, either fast and loud exposure or slow and quiet. I choose slow. I paid for that choice with 2 weeks of lies. That was an expensive price, but it was less than the price of mistakes I might make in the heat of the moment. That was a professional decision. That's how I work in the clinic. When I have a difficult case, I don't do the first thing that comes to mind. I sit down, read the patient's chart, consult with a colleague, think it through. I applied the same approach to the biggest problem of my life. That was probably one of the most rational decisions I've ever made in a moment of emotional shock. I'm not proud of it and not ashamed of it. I just note it worked. When I was done, I put the phone back under the bed, exactly where it had been. I petted Yucca, got up, and went to check on the children. Maya was playing with a doll in her room. Owen was asleep. I stood by Owen's door for a minute, watching him breathe. A little boy, 4 years old, lying there, and not knowing that in his house something had just broken finally. I closed the door quietly, went downstairs to my study, and started thinking. The first decision I made that evening was, I won't make a scene. I have 2 children, and I don't want them to remember the day Daddy yelled at Mommy. The second decision was, I won't act today. I need time to verify everything, document everything, and figure out what I want to do. The third decision was the most important. I'll do this right. Not fast, not emotionally, but right. Haley came home at 6:15. She came in, kissed me on the cheek, asked about Bruno. I told her about the paw. She was genuinely concerned. She loves Bruno as much as I do. I observed her. When you live with a person for 12 years, you learn to look at them in 2 layers, the layer of the one you love and the layer of the one standing in front of you. Until that day, I had only the first layer. From that day on, the second appeared. Haley was telling me about some house she'd been showing. I looked at her lips and saw that the words were coming, but they weren't coming from the Haley I'd known for 12 years. They were coming from some other woman who lived inside her in parallel, and whom I hadn't suspected. I said nothing. I smiled and nodded. We sat down to dinner. Maya was telling something about kindergarten, about a boy who tried to eat a plastic bug. Owen was eating pasta and smearing sauce on his cheeks. It was the ordinary scene of our ordinary dinner, the scene that had repeated for us hundreds of times. Only into that scene, for the first time in my life, knowledge had entered. I watched my family from the outside, like a viewer in a movie, and saw everything at once. My beautiful wife, my laughing children, our dog, who begged for sausage scraps from under the table, and the invisible crack that ran through the center of that picture. I showed nothing. When Haley laughed at Maya's joke, I laughed too. When she passed me the salt, I thanked her. When we were clearing the dishes, we stood side by side at the sink, and she asked if I was tired. I said yes, a little. She put her hand on my shoulder. It was her usual touch, warm, familiar. I didn't pull away. I thought in that second, this is maybe the last time she'll touch me like this without knowing that I know. I wanted to remember this second, not because I wanted to preserve it, because I understood that some version of mine was just ending, and I wanted to see it one last time before it disappeared. After dinner, she went upstairs. I heard her take the phone from under the bed. There was a faint scraping on the floor. She went to the bathroom to write to him, I assumed. That same night, I started preparing. I didn't do anything emotional. I did what I do every day at the clinic when I face a difficult case. I gathered data. The next day, while Haley was at work, I went into the bedroom, took the phone out again, and this time, I photographed everything. Every message. Every exchange from 4 months. I sent those photos to my secure cloud account with 2-factor authentication that Haley didn't know about. Then I put the phone back. I didn't delete anything, didn't change anything, didn't give myself away in any way. That same day at the clinic, I had an appointment that I'll remember forever. An elderly woman came in, Mrs. Talbot, with her old cat named Pepper. Pepper was 16 years old, he had cancer, and we both knew this was his last visit. Mrs. Talbot wanted to say goodbye. She didn't want Pepper to suffer. I'd worked with Mrs. Talbot for about 10 years. She'd come with Pepper regularly. They had a deep bond, the kind only lonely elderly people have with their animals. I did my work. Pepper went quietly in Mrs. Talbot's arms, and she cried silently. And I cried too, because I always cried during procedures like that. I'm not very professional in that respect. After she left, I sat in my office and just sat for 10 minutes. I thought, 5 hours ago I read messages that destroyed my family. Now I've just helped a woman say goodbye to her beloved life companion. These two things somehow strangely converged for me into one day. I understood something in that second that I couldn't put into words then, but that I can now. Life doesn't lay out its events in a meaningful order. They happen in parallel. Love and betrayal, life and death, beginning and end, they all run at the same time, at different points, and we have to be able to hold them simultaneously. That's the work of adulthood that most of us aren't ready for. I wasn't ready. But that day I started learning, with Pepper and Mrs. Talbot in one hand, and with the photos of the messages in the other. I closed the clinic, drove home, had dinner with the family, and continued preparing. On Tuesday of the second week, another episode happened at the clinic that I remember. A German shepherd named Zeus was brought in. He'd been hit by a car near his owner's house. The owner was a man my age who was in total panic. I performed surgery, Zeus survived, and while we waited for him to come out of anesthesia, the man sat in the hallway, holding his head in his hands and crying. I came over, sat next to him, and just stayed silent for about 10 minutes. At some point he said, "Doctor, he'll be okay, right?" I said, "Yes, he'll be okay." I knew that to be true, and I wasn't lying. He looked at me and said, "Thank you. Without him, I'd have nothing left." I didn't know his story. I didn't ask. But I understood in that second that this man was living in his own personal catastrophe, and his dog was his only support. I sat next to him and thought, I have a personal catastrophe right now too. I also have a dog, Yuka, who in a few days will be my support in a new house. We were two men of about the same age, in one hallway, in different catastrophes, but both stories were about the same thing, that dogs often turn out to be the only thing that holds us in the darkest moments. That episode had nothing to do with my divorce, and at the same time, it had the most direct relation. I understand that second why Yuka is such an important part of this whole story, not because she found the phone, but because she was, and is, the constant that allows me to bear everything else. I discharged Zeus and the man 2 days later, and never saw him again. I hope they're both doing well. I hope Yuka and I are doing well too. So far we are. I went to our family lawyer. Not to her acquaintances, not to my acquaintances, but to a lawyer I'd worked with only on clinic matters, who'd never crossed paths with Haley. I explained the situation. I asked him to prepare divorce papers, accounting for the fact that we have joint property, the house, 2 cars, my savings, her retirement account, the clinic business, which is formally listed as joint, though she's never worked in it. The lawyer said preparation would take 2 weeks. I said I have 2 weeks. I also asked him to prepare custody papers. I wanted half the time with the children, not less. The lawyer looked at me and said, "You have grounds for filing for changed conditions. If you want, we can file for full custody." I said no. I didn't want to use Haley's infidelity against her in the matter of the children. The children love their mother, and she's a good mother. I didn't want to mix her one role with her other. The lawyer nodded. He said it was professional and dignified. I said nothing. This lawyer's name is Ryan Peters. He's in his 50s, works alone, has a small office on the 2nd floor above a bookstore in downtown Asheville. I'd gone to him for 5 years on clinic business. He helped me with licenses, insurance, equipment registration. He'd never talked to me as a friend. He was a professional who did his job. When I came to him with this case, I expected approximately the same reaction. Neutral, legal. But Ryan surprised me. He set aside the notebook he was writing in, looked at me, and said one thing. "Evan, I'll do anything you ask, but I want you to hear me. What you're doing right now is rare behavior. Most people in your position want blood. They come to me asking me to destroy the other side. You came asking for cleanness. I respect you for that, and I promise you I won't try to convince you of blood. If you want to be tougher at some point, we'll discuss it. But I'll never propose it first." I nodded. There was a lump in my throat. That was one of the human reactions I hadn't expected in those 2 weeks. I thought I'd be alone in that cold zone. It turned out there are people who understand that zone and are ready to enter it with me. That was the first time I felt I could handle this. Before that moment, I was just acting on adrenaline and instinct. After that conversation, I understood I have infrastructure. A lawyer who sees the same thing I do. That made the next 2 weeks much easier. In parallel, I did one more thing. I hired a private detective for 3 days. Only so that I'd have photos of her and him, in case in court anyone tried to dispute my evidence by saying I found someone else's phone. The detective did his work in 2 days. He brought me a folder of photographs. I didn't open it. I put the folder in the safe at the clinic, next to the medical records of especially valuable patients. That evidence was my insurance. Not a weapon, but insurance. When he handed me the folder, we met in a shopping center parking lot. He pulled up in a gray car, rolled down the window, handed me a brown envelope. I paid in cash, as we'd agreed. He said one thing before he drove away. "Mr. Marshall, I hope you never open this envelope." I didn't understand right away, he clarified. "If you open it, it means the case went to court and you had to defend yourself. If it stays sealed in your safe, it means everything went the way it should. I've worked 25 years and I know the best folders are the ones that are never opened." I nodded. I put the envelope in the trunk, drove to the clinic, and hid it in the safe. That folder is still there. I've never opened it. I don't know what photographs are in it. I don't want to know. I have my own evidence from the messages. That was enough for the divorce. The folder from the detective turned out to be the kind of insurance that works precisely by not being used. A year after the divorce, I wanted to throw it out. But then I thought, let it stay. It's a symbol of that period of my life when I did everything right. Sometimes it's useful to have such symbols. They remind you that in a moment of crisis, you behaved like an adult. I have days when I doubt that. The folder in the safe tells me I didn't doubt when it mattered. That's enough. I want to describe how I hired this detective, because that meeting was also one of the strange moments of my life. I found him through the lawyer's recommendation. He worked in a small office in a strip mall on the outskirts of town, next to a self-service laundromat. I went there on Tuesday during my lunch break. In regular clothes, no one recognized me on the way. The detective was a man around 60, a former police officer, very calm, with a smoke-roughened voice. He didn't ask extra questions. I said I needed confirmation of the fact of my wife's infidelity, without pressure, without intervention, just photographs. He asked what for divorce or for a conversation? I said for divorce and that I'd already decided everything. He nodded. He named the price, it was reasonable, and said he'd start on Thursday. As I was leaving, he said one thing to me. "Mr. Marshall, I've worked for 25 years. I've seen hundreds of cases like this. I want to tell you one thing. Most men in your position come to me after they've already made a scene at home and lost half their positions. You came before. That's right. That means you'll get through this. The ones who come after usually don't get through." I didn't find anything to say. I just thanked him and left. Those words stayed in my head for several days. I thought, maybe I really will get through this. Until that moment, I hadn't been sure. After that moment, I had something close to certainty. That was an unexpected benefit of meeting a man who'd seen hundreds of cases like that. He knew how to give you perspective that you didn't yet have yourself. For those 2 weeks, I continued to live at home, as if nothing had happened. I had dinner with Haley, talked with the children, walked the dogs. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Harder than veterinary school exams. Harder than the first time I put down my own dog. Harder than when my father died. Every evening I lay down in bed next to a woman who had been betraying me for 4 months, and I didn't have the right to show it. I kept myself in clinician mode. Observe, document, don't react. Once at night, she put her hand on my chest in her sleep, and I almost suffocated. I didn't move her hand away. I lay and looked at the ceiling until 4 a.m. In those 2 weeks, I had one especially difficult moment. It was the second Saturday, our family morning ritual. Every Saturday, we'd make pancakes together, the 4 of us. Maya would set the plates. Owen would arrange the berries. I'd make coffee. Haley would mix the batter. That was a tradition of about 6 years. On that Saturday morning, I stood at the stove, watched her mix milk with flour, and thought that I knew something about her that would destroy this breakfast, this tradition, this family rhythm. I held that knowledge alone. The children suspected nothing. Haley suspected nothing. I was the sole bearer of information that in 10 days would change everything. It's a terrible feeling, being the only one who sees the family's future. Maya at some point ran up to me and hugged my leg, as she always does. I put my hand on her head. I almost said something I wouldn't have been able to take back. I stayed silent. I flipped the pancake and smiled. And after breakfast, I went out with the dogs for an hour. We walked to the little creek behind our house. I sat on a rock and I sat there for a long time. Yucca put her head on my knee. I understood at that moment that I was doing everything right, that I was keeping the pace I needed. But that knowledge didn't make it easier. It was like anesthesia. It works, but you still know that someone inside you is performing surgery. I let go of that Saturday as the last normal day of our family in its previous form. I knew the next Saturday would be different. During those 2 weeks, I did a few more things. I opened a new bank account in my name and transferred half of our joint savings into it. Exactly half. Not $1 more. I knew the lawyer would later confirm that I had the right to do that, and I didn't want to give her any grounds to accuse me of financial deception. I found a small house for rent in a nearby neighborhood, 2 stories, with a small yard 10 minutes from Maya's school. I signed a 12-month lease. I want to describe the moment I signed the lease on my new house. It was on a Wednesday during my lunch break. I went to the office of a small real estate company, not the one where Haley worked, deliberately, and signed papers with a woman of about 25. She didn't ask questions. I was just one of her clients. She gave me the keys. I went outside, got in my car, and just sat, holding those keys. They were 2 brass keys on a single ring with a plastic tag that had the address written on it. I thought in that second that I had in my pocket the keys to a house I'd never lived in which I was going to start a new life. Haley didn't know about this house. The children didn't know. None of my friends knew. It was my secret. And for now, I had to keep it. I put the keys in my pocket, drove back to the clinic, and worked until 7 in the evening. I arranged with my colleague, Dr. Rice, to close the clinic on the days I'd need to be in court. I didn't tell him why, just that I'd have a family circumstance, and he didn't ask further questions. On the way home, I pulled into the parking lot across from my future house and sat there for about 5 minutes, just looking at it. 2 stories, white, with a small porch, with a lone maple in the yard. I pictured Maya and Owen playing on that porch. I pictured Yuka sleeping on the porch. I pictured myself a year from now, sitting in this house after work, reading a book, without the tension that had become my norm in those 2 weeks. That picture gave me the strength to drive back to our old house and spend another evening in scout mode. Sometimes you need a picture of the future you're heading toward. Without it, moving through a collapsing present is hard. I want to describe how I packed the boxes. It was at night, the night from Thursday to Friday, the day before I planned to talk to the children. Haley was asleep upstairs. I quietly went out to the garage where I kept empty boxes from veterinary supply shipments. I took 5, carried them down to the basement, and started packing. I knew I had exactly 1 night. If I stretched it over several nights, Haley would notice. I worked from 12 at night until 4 in the morning. I packed in the boxes only what I needed for sure and what wasn't shared. My books, I have about 100, mostly veterinary references, but also a few books from my father, which he passed down to me before his death. My tools, a few screwdrivers, wrenches, my old army knife that Caleb gave me for my 25th birthday. My documents, passport, driver's license, certificates, clinic licenses, photographs of my parents. I had 1 album that I kept separately from our shared family albums. Photographs of Maya and Owen. I took duplicates. All our important photos were copied both to my cloud and to hers, and in physical form in 2 copies. That was our way of insuring against loss. Back then, I didn't think of it as insurance against divorce, but it actually turned out that way. I didn't take anything shared. None of the furniture, none of the kitchenware, none of what Haley and I had bought together or received as gifts at the wedding. I wanted to leave clean. If I started dividing shared things on day one, later it would be impossible to separate mine, shared, and hers. I decided to give up half of the shared property to avoid fighting over every trifle. The lawyer would later settle it formally and I'd receive monetary compensation. That was the right way. I worked for 4 hours, packed 5 boxes, carefully labeled each one with a marker. Books, documents, photographs of tools, personal. I sealed them with tape and carried them back to the garage, into the far corner where Haley didn't look. I covered them with an old tarp. By 5 in the morning, I was back in bed. Haley didn't stir. I lay for another hour, not falling asleep, thinking that today was the last full day of my old life. Tomorrow at this time, I'd already be in the new house. I didn't cry. I just looked at the ceiling until dawn. I also made a list of things to leave the children unchanged. Their rooms, their toys, everything as they were used to. I didn't want the divorce to look to them like a scene of disaster. Each of these steps was taken during hours when Haley wasn't home or when she was sleeping. I didn't use shared email, only the secure work account she had no access to. I didn't sign anything with a home pen, didn't leave documents on the kitchen table, didn't talk on the phone in rooms where she could hear. I'd call the lawyer from the car in the parking lot near the clinic, or from the back room of the clinic during lunch. It was a strange way of living. For 2 weeks I lived as a scout in my own home. It required great concentration. I had a headache almost every day. I had a poor appetite. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and lie there, double-checking in my head whether I'd left any digital trace by which Haley could find out ahead of time. Once I sent the lawyer a document from my work computer, and then for half an hour I checked the browser history to make sure nothing remained. That was petty. That was paranoid. It was also necessary. I had one chance to do this right, and I had no right to make a mistake. If Haley had found out that I knew before I finished preparing, she could have taken her own steps. Taken the children to her mother, withdrawn money, brought in her own attorney. I wanted to be a step ahead at every moment. I was. Those 2 weeks changed me in something fundamental. I learned to hold inside myself an enormous volume of knowledge without letting out a single drop. That skill stayed with me. Now I sometimes notice that I naturally use it at work, when I have a difficult case and I don't want the animal's owners to see my worry. Before, I would have shown it. Now I know how to hold it. That was one of the things I learned as a result of that summer. Not the happiest, but real. On Wednesday of the second week, I went to her parents. They live an hour away in a small town. I came without warning. Her mother opened the door, surprised. Her father was sitting in the living room. I said I needed to talk to both of them. I told them what I knew. I showed them photographs of the messages from the phone. I spoke calmly, evenly, like a clinician informing relatives of a patient's diagnosis. I said I was filing for divorce. I said I didn't want to drag them into conflict, and I wasn't asking them to take any side. I said I just wanted them to know the truth before Haley told them her version. Her mother cried. Her father was silent. I want to tell about this meeting in more detail because it turned out to be one of the most important in my decision. Her parents, Margaret and Tom, were people I'd known for 12 years, almost as my own. When my father died 8 years ago, Tom came to the funeral and stood next to me at the cemetery. Margaret sat with Maya when Maya was 2 years old, and I couldn't find a sitter for the night shift at the clinic. Those relationships were not just my wife's family to me, they were my own family. When I sat across from them and started talking, my hands were shaking, not from fear, from shame. I knew I was destroying their idea of their own daughter. Margaret read the photographs of the messages slowly, and her face changed page by page, from incomprehension to disbelief, and then to something heavier, something like grief. Tom didn't read, he just looked out the window. When I finished, he said, "I'd been suspecting." Margaret looked at him reproachfully, as if he had no right to say that. But Tom didn't back down. He said, "She was at our place last time 2 months ago. She sat at this table, and I looked at her and thought, something's off. She behaved like a stranger in our family. I didn't know exactly what. I didn't let myself think further. I understood in that second that I wasn't the only one who'd felt something. Tom had been warned by the same paternal signals that warned me, only we'd both not let ourselves read them. Margaret was crying now without holding back. Tom stood up, came over to me, hugged me. and said one phrase. "Evan, you deserve better than what my daughter did to you." I didn't expect that phrase. I almost cried for the first time in 2 weeks, but I didn't cry. I said goodbye and drove home. On the way, I pulled over once and sat in the car for about 20 minutes. Yucca wasn't with me. I was alone. I didn't cry. I just sat and thought that I'd just gone through a moment most people in my situation don't go through. I chose not to wait while Haley wove her version, and not to act afterward, trying to refute it. I went to her parents myself first and showed them the documents. That was maybe the most important strategic step in this whole story. It deprived Haley of her main default ally, her own family. I didn't do that. The facts did. I just showed them. On Friday of that week, the lawyer finished the documents. On Thursday evening, the day before the day I had everything planned for, I did one strange thing. I went into Maya's room when she was already asleep and looked at her for a long time. Just stood in the doorway for about 10 minutes. She was sleeping on her side, hugging her plush giraffe we'd given her for her 3rd birthday. Her hair lay on the pillow. She was breathing quietly and evenly. I looked at her and thought that tomorrow, at this time, her life would be fundamentally different in some way. She wouldn't know that. She'd be sleeping the same way. But her parents wouldn't be living under one roof anymore, and she'd wake up on Saturday in a family that's now calmly sleeping and by evening no longer exists in the form it had her entire life. I came over and adjusted her blanket, kissed her on the forehead. She stirred but didn't wake. I went into Owen's room. He was sleeping on his back, arms thrown wide like a little sea urchin. I stood there for a long time too. I knew I was doing something in that second that would be hard for my children to remember when they grew up. An ordinary Thursday, nothing remarkable. The last full Thursday of their childhood in the form it had been. But I wanted to remember it myself. I left their rooms understanding that I was giving them a new form of family. Not better or worse than the old. Just different. I prayed quietly. I'm not a religious person, but in that second I prayed that they'd have the strength to bear it. They had it. Children are stronger than us. I didn't know it yet in that second. Tomorrow, I'd start learning it. So on Saturday morning, when Haley went out for her morning run, runs were also one of her covers as I'd established from the messages, I gathered the children in my study. Just the 2 of them. I told Maya and Owen that Mommy and Daddy loved them very much, and that would never change. I said Mommy and Daddy had decided to live separately. I said they'd see both of us, that they'd have 2 rooms and 2 houses, and that we'd both always be there. Maya asked a few questions. Owen didn't understand. He asked if he could have 2 birthdays now. I said, we'll see. When I finished speaking, I hugged them both and said I loved them very much. I'd prepared this conversation for a week. I'd read articles. I'd talked on the phone with the school psychologist who worked at Maya's school without identifying myself or explaining the situation. Just hypothetically. I'd written down on a piece of paper the main principles. Don't blame Mom. Don't scare them with changes more than necessary. Use simple words. Don't promise what I can't guarantee. Let them ask questions. Don't interrupt. I repeated those principles in my head several times before calling them into my study. And when they came in, Maya in pink pajamas with dinosaurs, Owen with his plush monkey, my heart squeezed so hard that I almost forgot everything I'd prepared. But I began. Maya listened very carefully. When I said the word separately, she asked, "Are you going to get married to other people?" I said I didn't know, that it was too early to think about that, but that my love for her and Owen wouldn't change, whatever happened. Maya nodded. Then she asked a question that stunned me. "And who is Bruno going to live with?" I said Bruno would be in the main house with Mom because he's old and it's hard for him to move, and Yucca would move with me because she's my dog. Maya said, "Okay." Owen at that moment was playing with his monkey and listening half-heartedly. When I finished, I hugged them. Maya hugged my neck tightly and asked quietly in my ear, "Daddy, are you sad?" I answered honestly, "A little sad, but I'll be okay. And we'll all be okay." That was probably the most important moment of my fatherhood in 7 years. I told my child the truth, that I was sad, and at the same time reassured her. I didn't deny my feelings, but I structured them so they wouldn't frighten her. I'm not sure I did it perfectly. Maybe I could have done it better, but I did it as well as I could in that moment. I let them go play, and within an hour they were already running around the yard with Yucca, as if nothing had happened. Children are made that way. They take in information, process it, and continue to live. They have more forgiveness toward life than we do. I watched them from the kitchen window and thought, maybe all this would work out after all. That was the hardest conversation of my life. But I had it before Haley came back, so the children would hear my version first, without a scene, without yelling, without her tears. Haley came back around 10. She saw my face in the kitchen and understood something had happened. I asked her to sit across from me at the kitchen table. I put the folder in front of her. In the folder were the divorce papers, the list of joint property with my proposal for division, and one photograph, just one, of the home screen of that old phone, with her picture in the dress I hadn't recognized. I said to her very quietly, "Haley, I know everything. I have evidence, I have a lawyer, I have a plan. I've already told the children we're divorcing. I've already rented a house. I want you to read these documents now. If you agree with the conditions, we file on Monday. If not, we go to court, and I use everything I have. I don't want a scandal. I want this to end cleanly. I no longer want to talk to you about anything except the children. I want to describe her face in that moment, because I'll remember it until the end of my life. Haley is a beautiful woman, and she has a face that knows how to express many things at once. When she read the first words on the first page of the documents, her face turned white within about 5 seconds. It wasn't paled skin. It was some other kind of paling. From inside, as if blood had literally retreated from the surface, her lips stayed half open. She didn't blink. I sat across from her and counted her breaths. 1 breath, 2 breaths. On the third, she finally blinked. She turned the page, read the list of joint property, turned another, saw the photograph, and here's what I didn't expect happened. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She put the photograph back into the folder and slowly closed it. That was the gesture of a person who understands the game is over and who chooses dignity over panic. In that second, for the first time in 2 weeks, I saw in her something I'd call strength of character. That didn't justify anything she'd done, but it told me the conversation would go better than I'd feared. She was silent for a very long time. She opened the folder again. She saw the photograph a second time. She paled even more. She tried to say something, to start justifying, to explain. I raised my hand. I said, "Haley, I don't want to listen. I've loved you for 12 years, and in those 12 years, I never once lied to you. Not once. I had time over these 2 weeks to think about what I want, and I understood that I don't want to hear your story. I don't want to forgive or not forgive. I just want this to end. Read the documents." She read. I divided everything in half, fairly. I wasn't taking her retirement account. I wasn't claiming her car. I proposed equal custody, week on, week off. She saw that I'd been generous where I could have been cruel. She raised her eyes to me. She asked, "Evan, isn't it possible to talk?" I said, "Yes, through lawyers. Tomorrow." I got up and went upstairs to gather my things. I had 5 pre-packed boxes in the garage. I'd prepared them on Wednesday night. I loaded them into my car, put Yucca in the back seat. The lawyer and I had agreed in advance that Yucca was going with me because I'd taken her in and she was attached to me, and Bruno stayed with the children in the main house, which remained Haley's. I said goodbye to Bruno. He licked my hand. I drove to my new house. On Monday, Haley signed the papers. No arguing, no lawyers. She knew that any attempt at bargaining would turn out worse for her. Within 6 weeks, the divorce was finalized. Within 4 months, I'd fully moved into my new house and arranged the children's rooms the same way they were in the old place. Same posters, same colors, same toys. So Maya and Owen would feel equally at home in both houses. For those 6 weeks, I kept working at the clinic, and work saved me. I want to emphasize this because when you have a personal crisis, there's a temptation to drop everything, take time off, withdraw. I didn't do that. I came to the clinic at 8 in the morning every day. I treated dogs and cats. I talked with their owners, answered their questions, did my job the way I'd done it all my life. None of my clients knew what I was going through. None of my colleagues knew either, except Dr. Rice. And Dr. Rice kept it to himself and didn't ask questions. I went to work not out of a sense of duty. I went because work was the only place where my life remained the same as always. In my personal life, everything had turned upside down. At work, everything was the same as before. Every day I went into my office, put on my coat, and for 8 hours, I was just Dr. Marshall, a vet whose patients are sick and who needs to treat them. That gave me a respite from my own story. By the end of the day, I'd returned to the new reality, but I had 8 hours when I could be a person with no drama. Those 8 hours saved me from breakdown. I tell this to everyone going through something similar. Don't quit your work. If you have work that gives you stability, hold on to it in these months. It doesn't distract from pain. It gives your identity a place where it can stay whole while everything else is being rewritten. Dr. Rice, by the way, became my best friend within 6 months. Before that, we'd worked together for 3 years, but we were just colleagues. When he realized what I was going through, and he realized within a couple of weeks, without my explanations, he became more attentive, started inviting me to dinner with his wife. Then we began spending weekends together with the children. That was the second unexpected friendship that grew out of this story. I have much more warmth in my life now than I could have predicted. I want to tell about one moment in the first month after moving, which was especially hard for me. It was a Friday, and it was my first dad's weekend, my days with the children under the new schedule. I came to pick up Maya and Owen from the old house. Haley opened the door. Between us was maximum tension. We tried not to look at each other. Maya hugged her goodbye at the door, and Maya was crying. For the first time since our conversation. Not loudly, quietly, the way children cry when they're not sure if they're allowed to cry. I stood on the porch and watched the scene. Haley held Maya and whispered something in her ear. I didn't hear. I just watched. In that second, I wanted to cancel everything. To go up onto the porch, say, Haley, let's try again. Take everyone home, forget about lawyers and rent. That was the strongest feeling I had in the whole story. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then Maya let her mother go, took my hand, and I led her to the car. On the way to my new house, she was silent. Owen was telling something about yesterday's kindergarten, not understanding the situation. When we arrived, Maya asked if I could put her doll the same way it was at Mom's. I put it that way. She lay down in her new bed, and I sat by her door for another hour until I was sure she was sleeping calmly. On that first Friday, I understood one thing. A decision that was right 24 hours ago can feel wrong in the moment. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It means you have a moment of doubt. Doubts need to be endured. They're normal. They're not a signal to turn around. They're a signal that you're a living person and that it's hard for you. If I'd turned around that Friday, I'd have regretted it for the rest of my life. I didn't turn around. I endured the doubt. That was one of the hardest tasks of my life, and I got through it. After that first Friday, it got easier. Not much, but noticeably. Each next dad's weekend was slightly less painful. Within 2 months, they became a normal part of life. I also remember the first morning Maya and Owen woke up in my new house. It was a Saturday. I'd bought everything for pancakes in advance. That was their favorite food. And I made them myself, for the first time without Haley's help, because pancakes had been her tradition. I made them by her recipe, which I'd learned by watching her for years. Maya woke up first, at 7 in the morning, came downstairs in her pajamas. She saw me at the stove and asked, "Dad, you're making pancakes?" I said yes. She sat down at the table silently. She watched me, the way a small child watches when they're not sure if they're allowed to be fully here. When I put the first pancake in front of her, she ate it carefully, as if checking, is it real? Not Dad's failed version, but real Saturday pancakes. She ate it, looked at me and said, "Dad, they're the same." I smiled. I said, "I learned from Mom, so they should be the same." She nodded seriously. Owen woke up half an hour later, ran in toward the smell, and ate 4 pancakes with blueberries. Yuka waited under the table and caught the pieces Owen accidentally dropped. That was the first morning of our new family form. I understood in that second that we'd build something new, and that this new thing wouldn't be a copy of the old, but it could be good too. Maybe in some ways even better. Maya helped me clear the dishes. Yuka watched us from the floor. Owen played with a construction toy in the living room. That was one of the quietest, most ordinary, and happiest moments of that year. I remember it as the point at which I understood we'd make it. Within 6 months, Maya was already packing her own bag when it was my day and asking what we were going to do this week. There was another conversation with Maya that I want to retell. It happened about a year after the divorce. The two of us were alone. Owen had gone to his grandmother Margaret's for the night, and we were making dinner. Maya was helping me cut cucumbers for a salad. At some point she stopped, looked at me, and asked, "Dad, did you stop loving Mom?" I didn't expect it. I put down the knife, wiped my hands, and thought for a minute about how to answer. I knew that my answer would shape how Maya thought about love in the future. I said roughly this: I loved Mom very much for many years. Now I don't love her the way I did before, but I haven't stopped loving her entirely. I just love her in a different way, as the mother of my children. And I'll always respect her as a mother, whatever happens. Maya thought and asked, "And did she love you?" I said I was sure she had, and that sometimes grown-ups stop loving each other in a way that lets them live together, but that doesn't mean they never loved. She nodded. She went back to the cucumbers. After a minute, she said quietly, "I don't want this to happen to me when I'm big." I hugged her shoulders and said, "Maya, if you're honest with the person you love, and he's honest with you, you'll be fine. Not everyone manages, but many do." She pressed against me, and we stood like that for a minute. Then she went back to her cucumbers. That conversation is in my memory as one of the most important moments of my fatherhood. I don't know whether I helped her or harmed her, but I answered honestly. I didn't make Haley into a monster in our daughter's eyes, and I didn't make love into something scary that's better not trusted. I just described reality as I saw it. Maya, I hope, will use this later, when her time comes to fall in love. 6 months after the divorce, Haley called me with a very strange request. She asked if her mother could sometimes come visit the children on my days too. Her mother missed them. I agreed without hesitation. Her father and mother remain close people to me. They keep coming to the grandchildren's birthdays in my house, and Haley allows it. That was one of the unexpected good things that came out of this whole story. Her parents on my side. Not against Haley, but on the side of truth. That's rare, and I value it. I want to describe the first time Margaret came to my new house. It was about 2 months after the divorce. She called in the morning and asked if she could come over for an hour to bring Maya and Owen some homemade pies she baked on Saturdays. I said of course. She came at 4. I opened the door and she came in with a large basket of pies and a bag of children's things that Haley had forgotten to give back. She looked at my house, a simple living room with a couch and a couple of unopened boxes of books, and said, "It needs curtains here, Evan, and maybe a picture on this wall. I'll help you." I didn't expect it. I hadn't asked her for help. But over the next 2 months, Margaret came over several times, and gradually my house came to look more like a home than a box I was living in. She brought things from her own house, an old carpet she didn't need anymore, 2 lamps, a picture of a horse that I never would have bought myself, but that fit well in the living room. She didn't say anything about Haley. I didn't ask. Between us there formed some new kind of relationship, not former mother-in-law and son-in-law, but just 2 adults who loved the same children, and who once both loved the same person who now lives apart from us both. That was an unexpected acquisition. I thought that in a divorce you lose all your wife's relatives. I was wrong. I lost some and gained others. Margaret and Tom became my family forever. Maybe closer than they'd been when we were formally connected through Haley. Strange thing, these family ties. They don't always run along the lines that are officially drawn for them. I don't know what happened between Haley and that man. They didn't stay together. They broke up about 3 months after our divorce, as I gathered from her mother's slips. I didn't ask for details. I'm not interested in it. In the early days, I sometimes wondered, what would I have felt if Haley and Drew had stayed together and been happy? I thought about it honestly, not trying to make myself nobler than I am. And I understood one thing. I wouldn't have rejoiced. I would have preferred their story to end badly. That was my human feeling, and I don't deny it. But I also understood that my life shouldn't have depended on that. If they had been happy, it wouldn't have undone anything in my decision. I wasn't getting divorced to punish Haley through the absence of happiness. I was getting divorced so that my own life would be honest. Their story is their story. Mine is mine. When I learned they'd broken up, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something more boring. Neutrality. That was information that changed nothing in my life. That's probably the best indicator that I'd really separated. Not when you're no longer angry at your ex. You can fake that. But when news about her life no longer evokes strong emotions in you, in either direction. It takes time. With me, it took about a year. Now I can calmly hear that Haley is dating a teacher and not react with anything. Not negativity, not approval. It's none of my business. It's her business. That's probably the end point of the divorce process. Not signing papers, but the day you understand that her life no longer touches yours. Haley is now dating another man, a very nice man, who works as a teacher in a local middle school. The children love him. I have nothing against it. It's her life. I myself have been seeing a woman for the past 7 months. Her name is Carolyn. She's a veterinary nutritionist. We met at a professional conference in Atlanta. I want to tell how we met, because this story also says something about how I've changed. The conference was ordinary. 3 days of lectures on new treatment methods, mediocre hotel food, networking in the breaks. On the first evening, I went into the hotel bar to have a cup of tea before bed. I still don't drink alcohol. Carolyn was sitting at the next table reading a book. Not a specialized one, but fiction. Something about Norwegian fishermen. I noticed the book because I love Norwegian literature. I didn't approach her. I just ordered tea and read my own material for the morning lecture. About 15 minutes later, she came over to me herself. She said, "Excuse me. I noticed you're also alone. I thought, maybe you're also bored sitting in this bar by yourself." I smiled. I said I wasn't bored, I was actually fine, but I wouldn't mind her company. She sat down. We talked until midnight. She told me about her divorce. 3 years ago, no infidelity, people just stopped suiting each other. I told her about mine, without details, just that I was divorced and had 2 children. We exchanged phone numbers. I didn't call her for 3 weeks. Not because I didn't want to, because I needed time to figure out whether I was ready. When I finally called, she answered with the words, "I thought you weren't going to call." I said I'd thought the same, but that I'd decided I was ready to try. Since then, we've seen each other once every 2 or 3 weeks. She lives in Charlotte, 2 hours away. It's not a passionate story. It's a quiet, adult, careful story. Maybe it will grow into something bigger. Maybe not. Either way, I'm grateful for it. Carolyn taught me that after a big wound, you can open up again, slowly, little by little. You don't have to jump right into a new marriage. You can just drink tea in a bar and read about Norwegian fishermen, and gradually understand that there are other good people in the world. Maya once asked me if it was serious with Carolyn. I said I didn't know, but that Carolyn was a good person, and that I was spending time with her because I felt good with her. Maya thought and said, "That's okay." That was all the approval I needed. Maya is stronger than I'd thought. Children in general are stronger than we assume. They survive our crises if we don't make them the center of our crises. I tried not to. Now looking back, it seems to me I managed. Not perfectly, but well enough that Maya and Owen are growing up without the heaviness that bad divorces give. That was my main task, and I think I accomplished it. I want you to understand the main thing from this story. I didn't expose Haley publicly. I didn't write posts, didn't make statements to friends, didn't turn her into a monster. I just gathered evidence, prepared the legal position, and on one Saturday morning, closed the door behind me as cleanly as is possible in a divorce with 2 small children. That was my exposure. Not loud, but absolute. I didn't deprive her of the children. I didn't destroy her socially. I just made it so her lies no longer meant anything because I knew everything and she knew I knew, and so the game ended. That's probably the coldest form of exposure, when you don't drag the truth onto the stage but just make it so transparent in front of you that it stops being a weapon in anyone's hands. I thought for a long time about why I chose this path instead of a louder one. I could have written a post on social media. I could have told her coworkers. I could have brought her parents into the courtroom and put on a public humiliation. I did none of that, and I want to explain why. Not because I'm better than other people or nobler, but because I knew my limits. Loud exposure requires you to live in a state of anger for a long time. You have to maintain inside yourself the fire of resentment in order to keep punishing the other person. That destroys not only the one it's aimed at, it destroys you too. I have 2 little children. I don't have the right to spend the next 5 years of my life on the fire of resentment. I have Maya and Owen who need a father whose insides aren't burning. So I chose a path that demanded 2 weeks of the strongest tension from me and then several months of recovery. That's a smaller price than years of maintaining war. That decision I made not for Haley. I made it for myself and the children. Haley got a side benefit. Her social reputation stayed intact. I can't say it pleases me, but I can't say it bothers me either. It just wasn't my goal. I want to add an important thought I came to in this year after the divorce. Many people in my situation want their offender to get what they deserve, for everyone around to see what a bad person he is and to judge him. That's a natural human desire, but it almost always backfires on you. When you try to force the world to judge your offender, you make yourself dependent on the world's reaction. If the world judges, you get a temporary satisfaction. If the world doesn't judge, or worse, starts sympathizing with the other side, you get a second wound on top of the first. I didn't want to depend on how the world reacted to Haley. I wanted to determine for myself what I considered justice, and I determined it this way. Justice for me means a clean separation and the preservation of my children, my work, my dignity. I have all of that now. Let Haley be who she wants to be. For my justice, her judgment isn't required. That's a position hard to take in a moment of fresh pain. It took me several weeks. But it's the right position, and I want you to hear it if you're in the heat of it now. Don't make your justice dependent on how others react to your story. Determine it inside yourself, and move toward it. If you're listening to this now, and you suspect your partner, I want to give you one piece of advice. Don't act in the heat of the moment. Don't make a scene. Don't attack at the moment of discovery. You'll regret it. Sit down, breathe, go to another room. Decide what you want. If you want to save the marriage, that's one scenario. If you want to leave, that's another scenario. They require different steps, but both require that you think clearly. An emotional reaction at the moment of discovery almost always works against you, especially if there are children, especially if there will be a division of property. A cool head isn't an absence of feelings. It's a container for feelings that allows you to act in your own favor while you live through those feelings. I want to add a few practical things that I learned. First, don't write to anyone at the moment of discovery. Not your best friend, not your brother, not your mother. I know. You want to? That's the first impulse. Find someone you can pour it out to. Don't do that for the first 2 days. When you say it out loud, you make it real, and at the same time, you lose the ability to control the story. If you tell your brother on day 1, within a week, your parents will know. Within 2 weeks, the neighbors will know. It's normal that they'll know later, but it shouldn't be that they find out before you have a plan. Second, don't dig further into her accounts than necessary. I had the desire to read every one of her emails over 4 months. Every call, every message to her friends. I stopped after I read the correspondence with Drew. I had enough for the lawyer. Everything else would have been torment for me without legal benefit. Third, engage your body. In those 2 weeks, I went out with the dogs every morning and walked briskly for 40 minutes. That kept me in an adequate state. When there's chaos inside, the body must be in motion. Otherwise, the chaos will eat you. Fourth, don't drink. I know, you want to badly. I didn't drink even once in those 2 weeks. When you're in that situation, alcohol works against you. It relaxes precisely the restrictions that you need now. Fifth, find a therapist. I didn't find one right away. I found one 6 months after the divorce, and I regretted that I hadn't found one earlier. I needed a person who wasn't my friend, wasn't my relative, and to whom I could say the hardest things without fear that they would later come up at some family dinner. A good therapist isn't a luxury, it's a tool. 1 hour a week for several months. That's less than the disorderly spending you'll do in the first year of divorce. It's the best investment in your own mental health you can make. I went to her for a year. I don't go anymore, but I can always return to her if something becomes hard again. Sixth, don't compare your timeline of recovery to anyone else's. I read stories online of people who fully recovered in 3 months. I read others who needed 3 years. With me, it took about 1.5 years. There's no right speed. There's your speed. Trust it. And one more thing. Don't use children as a weapon. Never. Children didn't choose their parents and didn't choose to divorce. Their role isn't to be an instrument of your revenge. Their role is to keep being children. Haley betrayed me. That was her decision and her responsibility. But she's still the mother of my children. And they love her. I had no right to deprive them of their mother just because she deprived me of a wife. That was one of the hardest things for me, to separate the husband in me from the father. The husband wanted to punish. The father wanted to protect. I chose the father. Every day, I choose the father. And that's probably the best decision I made in that whole story. At one of my sessions with my therapist, several months after the divorce, she asked me one question that made me think. She asked, "Evan, what's changed in you since you found out?" I thought for about 5 minutes before answering. I said I'd become tougher, probably. That I'd learned to keep things inside. That I'd stopped automatically trusting. She nodded. Then she asked, "And what stayed the same in you?" That was a harder question. I thought even longer. I said, "I remained a father who loves my children more than anything. I remained a vet who loves work. I remained the son of my father, a person for whom numbers mean people." She nodded again. Then she said, "That's a lot. Sometimes people after something like this think they become a completely different person. You got lucky. Your core stayed. The outer layers changed. That's a normal reaction to trauma. Don't make yourself into a new person. Make yourself into the same person, with more experience." I left that session with that phrase. Don't make yourself into a new person. Make yourself into the same person, with more experience. I applied that advice to everything. New relationships, work, my relationships with the children. I didn't try to become new Evan. I stayed Evan. Just Evan who now knows something he hadn't known before. I want to say one thing about my older brother. His name is Caleb. He lives in North Dakota, works as an agronomist. I called him 2 weeks after the divorce. That is, after everything was finalized and I was already living in the new house. Before that, I'd told him nothing. I called, told him everything in one long monologue, in a single call. He was silent, then said, "Evan, you did right." I asked him why he was so sure. He said one thing that I still sometimes repeat to myself. "Because you didn't call me on day one. If you'd called me on day one, I would have understood there's a scream in your chest, and I would have worried you'd do something stupid. You called 2 weeks later, and in your voice I hear a man who's already done everything. That means you went through it the right way." I didn't know how to answer. I cried quietly into the phone for about 3 minutes. Caleb listened and didn't hurry me. When I'd calmed down, he said, "Bring the kids for Christmas, to us. I'm waiting." I brought them. That was the best Christmas in many years. My brother did for me that month what brothers should do for each other, and what I didn't think to ask for. If you have a brother or a sister, don't forget them in such moments. They're not obligated to be useful to you. But if they turn out to be, that's one of the most valuable things life has. I have Caleb, I have Yucca, I have Maya, and Owen. That's my family now, It's different from what it was 3 years ago, but it's real. I live now in my rented house with Yuka. Bruno died last spring. Old age. The children were with me that weekend, and we buried him together under the apple tree in the yard. Haley came to the burial. She also loved Bruno. We stood silently. I held the shovel. She held Owen's hand. Maya was crying. Haley looked at me and quietly said, "Forgive me, Evan, for everything." I nodded. I said, "I know." That was our first personal conversation in 2 years. It lasted 5 seconds. That was everything that needed to be said. We have 20 years ahead of us of shared holidays, school events, graduations, our children's weddings. I'll have time to gradually forgive her. Not for her, for myself. So I don't carry this weight to the end of my life. After the burial, when Haley had left and the children had gone to sleep, I sat for a long time on the porch of my new house. It was a warm spring evening. Cicadas had already started chirring in the grass. Yuka sat beside me. I thought about Bruno, that he'd lived with us for 11 years, that he'd been part of our old family, and that his going meant not only his own ending, but the formal ending of the version of our life in which we'd all lived together. Bruno was the last witness of us as one whole. Now that us was no more. There was me and Yuka, and there was Haley and Bruno, and now Bruno had gone too. I wouldn't say I felt relief. I felt something else. Closure. Some long story that began in August 12 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding with a little corgi crawling under our table had finally closed this spring under an apple tree with a shovel in my hands. It was a good story. Not perfect, but good. I don't regret living those 12 years with Haley. They gave me 2 wonderful children and made me into the person I am now, including a person who knows how to act calmly in a moment of crisis. If not for Haley, I wouldn't have known I was capable of that. That may be a strange gratitude, but it's a real one. Life rarely gives lessons for free. This one was expensive, but I learned it. After Bruno died, Yuka spent several weeks looking for him around the house. She'd come up to his old bed, sniff it, lie down beside it, wait. I watched this and thought that dogs have their grief too. They experience loss the way we do, just without words. After a month, Yuka stopped looking. She accepted that Bruno was no more. She started lying on his bed herself, not out of longing, but out of practicality, because the bed was comfortable. I watched this and understood one simple thing. Acceptance is a process that has its own time. If you're honest with yourself and your grief, it will pass through you and leave you a different person, but a whole one. If you suppress it or deny it, it will stay inside and eat you. Yuka lived through her grief over Bruno openly. I lived through my grief over my marriage openly. Slowly, with my therapist, with Carolyn, with Caleb on the phone. Now I don't have sharp pain when I think about Haley. There's a soft sadness, like the sadness of a distant memory. That's right. That's the place you need to end up. Yuka reached hers before me. I reached mine within a year and a half. Everyone has their own pace. The main thing is to keep moving. I want to end where I began. I'm a vet. I worked with animals for 18 years. Every day I see how dogs and cats trust their owners completely, without reservations, without checks, without conditions. That's the purest trust that exists in the world. And every day, I also see that some owners don't deserve that trust. They come in with a dog that's been poorly fed, poorly treated, sometimes beaten. The dog still looks at them with love. That's the saddest thing I know about the world. That trust in its purest form can coexist with betrayal in its worst form. I no longer believe in pure trust between people. I believe in trust plus observation, in trust plus honesty, in trust that regularly checks itself, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for yourself. That may be a more boring kind of trust than what I gave Haley for 12 years, but it's real. And I think that Carolyn, the woman I'm with now, deserves precisely that kind of trust. I give it to her, and if someday she ever betrays me, I hope she won't, but if, I'll know what to do again. I already have a map. I walked it once. The second time will be easier. That isn't cynicism. That's maturity. I hope you'll gain that maturity without going through what I went through. If you're already going through it, I'm with you. That's all I can say. I'm with you. If this story resonated with you, like and subscribe. I'm not a professional storyteller, I'm a vet. I know more about trust than I'd like to. Take care of yourself. Listen to your dogs. Sometimes they know before you do. Until next time.